In the vast silence of Montana, a golden eagle begins its attack. But its prey is no rabbit. It's a lost German shepherd, powerful and desperate to survive. A lone hunter witnesses this impossible battle, facing a choice that will redefine the laws of nature. This is a story of survival and an extraordinary act of compassion you won't want to miss. If you're ready for the tale, show your support with a like and subscribe to our channel. Now, let the story begin. The emptiness was a living thing. It had been Max's unwanted companion for 3 weeks, a gnawing ache in his belly that had long since replaced the dull sorrow in his heart. He was a German shepherd, 4 years old, with a noble lineage evident in the proud set of his ears and the intelligent depth of his amber eyes. But the wilderness of Montana cared nothing for pedigrees. Here, he was just another creature, his once glossy black and tan coat now matted with burrs and streaked with the dust of lonely trails. Thirst was a constant torment, a fire in his throat that drove him forward when exhaustion screamed for him to surrender. The faded red nylon collar he wore was a cruel reminder, a ghost of a life left behind. The small metal tag bearing his name was a silent testament to a world of soft beds, full bowls, and the loving hand of the boy who had been his whole world. He moved with a caution that was not entirely his own, an instinct awakened by the harsh reality of survival. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of alarm through his thinned frame. He had learned the hard way about the creatures that owned this silence: the skulking coyote, the irritable badger. He was a hunter by breeding but a companion by nature, and the skills needed to pull down a meal in this unforgiving landscape were still foreign and clumsy. His hunger was a constant, dizzying fog, making the scent of a distant rabbit or a scurrying field mouse an agonizing form of torture. Far above him, in the vast, unforgiving sky, another hunger burned with even greater desperation. A golden eagle, a queen of this domain, carved slow, majestic circles against the pale blue canvas. Her wingspan, a breathtaking 7 feet, seemed to command the very air she rode, yet her movements were laced with a frantic edge. Below her, tucked into a rocky crevice on the face of a sheer cliff, 2 eaglets shrieked their need. Their thin, piercing cries were a physical blow to her, a sound that echoed the frantic beating of her own heart. For 2 days she had found nothing. The land, usually so generous, had become barren. Her incredible vision, sharp enough to spot a rabbit from a mile away, now scanned the terrain with a desperate, sweeping gaze, seeing only the taunting dance of wind through pine trees and the empty expanse of rock and meadow. She was not just a predator, she was a mother, and that ancient, powerful drive pushed her to the edge of her own endurance. On the ground, a man who understood both the dog's quiet desperation and the eagle's frantic hunt watched the sky. Elias Vance was a man carved from the Montana landscape itself, his face a roadmap of deep lines, etched by 70 years of sun, wind, and thought. As a retired park ranger, he had spent a lifetime learning the subtle language of this wilderness. He sat motionless against the trunk of a towering ponderosa pine, a natural part of the scenery, his faded green jacket blending with the moss and bark. His old Winchester rifle rested across his lap, less a tool of aggression and more a familiar extension of his own arm, a companion through decades of solitary walks. Elias's pale blue eyes, still sharp despite his age, were fixed on the eagle. He saw not just a bird, but a story. He recognized the tight, high circles of a hunter growing desperate, the slight tremor in the wingtips that spoke of exhaustion. He knew about the nest on the cliffside. He had watched generations of eagles raise their young there. He felt a familiar pang of respect and sorrow. The law of this place was simple and brutal, life fed on life, and today, the sky was hungry. Driven by the relentless fire in his throat, Max followed the gentle sound of trickling water. The sound grew louder, a promise of relief, pulling him through a thicket of aspen trees until he emerged onto the rocky bank of a clear, fast-moving stream. For a moment, he forgot his fear. He was just a thirsty dog. He lowered his head, his long pink tongue lapping gratefully at the icy, pure water, the cold shock, a momentary bliss that erased all other sensations. High above, the eagle's search pattern broke. Her head tilted, her golden eyes locking onto a flicker of movement below, a patch of black and tan against the gray stones of the stream bed. It was larger than her usual prey, much larger, but hunger was a powerful motivator, overriding caution. She adjusted her flight, folding her wings slightly to begin a silent, controlled descent. Elias saw the change immediately. The wide, searching circles tightened into a focused, deliberate spiral. He shifted his weight, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the worn stock of his rifle. He did not move to raise it, not yet. He was only a witness. But he knew, with the certainty of a man who had seen this drama play out 1,000 times, that the silence of the Montana afternoon was about to be broken by a scream. The first warning was not a sound but a shadow, a sudden and unnatural eclipse that fell over the sun-dappled water. Max felt it more than he saw it, a cold premonition that made the fur on his neck prickle. He lifted his head, water dripping from his muzzle, and in that split second, the world exploded. A force like a lightning strike slammed into his back, and searing, needle-sharp points of agony pierced him, sinking deep into muscle and sinew. A yelp of pure shock and pain was torn from his throat as his legs buckled beneath him. He had faced coyotes and badgers, but this was different. This was an attack from the sky itself, a brutal, silent fury that he had no way to comprehend. The golden eagle had struck with lethal precision. Her talons, hard as steel and honed by a lifetime of hunting, were locked deep into the dog's back. The satisfying clench of her grip sent a surge of primal triumph through her, momentarily silencing the phantom cries of her young, but her victory was short-lived. The creature beneath her was not a rabbit that would surrender in terror. It was a predator in its own right, and it was fighting back. Max's shock morphed into a desperate, life-or-death rage. He twisted his powerful body, his head whipping around, teeth snapping at the air, trying to reach the unseen enemy latched onto him. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of defiance and pain. He thrashed wildly, bucking and rolling on the rocky stream bed, trying to dislodge the immense weight and the source of his agony. The chaos was absolute, a maelstrom of black and tan fur, golden-brown feathers, and the furious screeches of the raptor. The eagle was battered and slammed against the stones, but her grip was like iron. She was a mother fighting for the future of her bloodline, and she would not let go. She beat her massive wings against Max's head and neck, not for flight, but as powerful bludgeoning clubs, trying to daze him into submission. From his vantage point, Elias Vance watched the brutal ballet unfold. Every instinct screamed at him to act. His hand was no longer resting on his rifle, it was gripping it, his thumb resting on the cold steel of the hammer. It would be an easy shot, a single, clean shot to end the eagle's life and save the dog. But his feet felt rooted to the forest floor. For 50 years he had lived by a code, a covenant with this wilderness. He was an observer, not a god. He did not interfere with the sacred, terrible balance of life and death. Yet the creature fighting for its life below was not a deer or an elk. It was a dog, a symbol of loyalty and companionship, a creature that belonged to his world, not this one. The conflict tightened his jaw and narrowed his eyes into slits. He felt a profound sense of wrongness, a violation of an unspoken boundary between the wild and the tame, but still, he did not move. The eagle knew she was losing the battle on the ground. The dog's strength was immense, and her own energy was flagging. In a moment of pure, desperate instinct, she made a choice. It was all or nothing. She anchored her talons deeper, ignoring the dog's pained howl, and gathered every ounce of strength in her magnificent body. With a shriek that tore through the valley, she exploded upwards. Her wings beat against the air not with grace, but with a frantic, percussive power that threw stones and water into the air. For Max, the world simply ceased to exist. The solid, reassuring ground vanished, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying void. One moment he was fighting on the earth, the next he was being hoisted into the empty sky. A new kind of panic, colder and more profound than any he had ever known, seized him. He continued to struggle, his legs kicking uselessly at the air, his body twisting in a futile effort to find purchase on nothingness. The ascent was a spectacle of impossible strength. The eagle's body was a taut knot of straining muscle, her wings hammering the air in a desperate rhythm. The weight of the German shepherd was almost unbearable. A dead anchor pulling her back to the earth, she fought so hard to escape. But, in her mind, she heard only one thing: the high, thin cries of her starving children. That sound was her fuel, her purpose. It transformed her from a mere bird into a force of nature, a mother's will made manifest, lifting her and her struggling, terrified prize higher and higher into the vast, indifferent blue of the Montana sky. Elias could only stare, his breath caught in his throat, a witness to an act that defied both logic and belief. The sky was a brutal, unforgiving realm. For the golden eagle, the initial surge of adrenaline had curdled into a deep, burning poison in her muscles. The dog's weight was a monstrous anchor, a relentless betrayal of the wind that had always been her ally. Each beat of her wings was a separate, agonizing war against gravity. The desperate cries of her eaglets, once a clarion call that gave her strength, now seemed to mock her from a world away, fading behind the roaring of blood in her own ears. Her flight, once a masterpiece of power and grace, became a clumsy, lurching struggle. She was a queen being dragged from her throne. For Max, awareness had dissolved into a nauseating, spinning chaos. The world was a meaningless blur of blue sky and green earth, tumbling one over the other. The talons embedded in his back were a constant, searing reality, but the will to fight was draining out of him, replaced by a profound and terrifying helplessness. He felt the eagle's grip tremble and her movements become erratic. A sickening lurch, a sudden dip, a frantic, flapping recovery. He was no longer a dog, just a weight, a passenger on a voyage destined for disaster. The air grew thin and cold, and then, with a final, shuddering tremor from the creature that held him, the struggle ceased. The eagle's strength broke. A cry of pure, frustrated rage escaped her as one wing faltered, refusing to obey. For a single, horrifying moment, they were suspended in the void, a bizarre sculpture of predator and prey. Then gravity, patient and absolute, claimed them both. They fell. It was not a graceful descent, but a chaotic, tumbling plunge, a tangle of fur and feathers, of flailing legs and useless wings. The wind shrieked past them, a final, deafening roar before the world ended in a sickening, violent impact. They slammed into a steep mountainside, a slope of loose rock and unforgiving granite, in an explosion of dust and shattered stone. And then, an absolute, profound silence fell, deeper and more complete than any that had come before. Elias ran. The careful, measured pace of the observer was gone, replaced by the urgent, ground-eating strides of a man racing towards a tragedy. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a prayer and a curse. He scrambled down the embankment, his boots dislodging pebbles that skittered down ahead of him, his eyes scanning the cloud of settling dust. The silence that had greeted him was the most unnerving part. It was the silence of finality. He saw Max first. The German shepherd lay in a horribly unnatural position, twisted against a large boulder. His beautiful coat was now a canvas of crimson and gray dust. A deep gash ran along his flank, and one of his hind legs was bent at an angle that spoke of broken bone. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths, each one a monumental effort. His eyes were half open, glazed with shock and a pain so immense it seemed to have burned away all other emotion. He was dying. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. A few yards away lay the eagle. She was a heap of magnificent, broken-looking feathers against the pale rock. As Elias approached, she stirred, a testament to her incredible resilience. She tried to rise, to assume a posture of defiance, but her right wing dragged uselessly beside her, trailing in the dirt. She let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound of pain and impotent fury. Elias stopped, keeping a respectful distance, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. He saw the unnatural angle of the wing, the way it sagged from the joint, but he also saw what was not there. There was no bone piercing the skin, no clean, gruesome break that would have been an undeniable death sentence. His gaze sharpened. He had seen injuries like this before in his years as a ranger. It was not a fracture. It was a severe dislocation, the powerful joint torn from its socket by the violent impact. The the surrounding muscle and ligaments badly bruised and torn. It was a crippling, agonizing injury, one that left her as grounded and helpless as any earthbound creature. But it was not hopeless. With rest, with a surge of energy she did not possess, recovery was not impossible. The queen was not dead, only dethroned, and in that small, crucial detail, the entire tragedy shifted on its axis. The silence on the mountainside was a heavy blanket, muffling the world in a shroud of dust and tragedy. Elias Vance stood at the center of it all, a lone man caught between two fallen titans. His gaze drifted from the broken form of the German shepherd, whose shallow breaths were fading into the stillness, to the defiant golden eagle, whose one good eye burned with a fire that pain could not extinguish. The hunter's logic, the ranger's code he had lived by for half a century, offered a simple, brutal solution. His rifle, cool and heavy in his hands, could offer a clean end to their suffering. It would be an act of mercy, a final, grim kindness to release them from their agony. But his knowledge was a burden. He looked at Max, and his heart ached with a familiar sorrow for a creature of his own world, lost and broken. He looked at the eagle, and he saw not just an injured bird, but a link in a vital chain. He knew of the nest, of the eaglets whose desperate cries had driven their mother to this reckless act. He understood that the eagle's death would not be a single death. It would be a silent sentence passed down to her young, who would starve in their high, lonely fortress, their calls fading into nothing. The choice was not between a dog and an eagle. It was between one life and three. It was a choice between a tragedy and a massacre. The weight of this understanding settled upon him, profound and absolute. This was not a moment for the simple calculus of the hunter. It required something more. Slowly, with a deliberation that felt sacred, Elias bent down and leaned his old Winchester rifle against a granite boulder. The quiet scrape of metal on stone was the only sound, a declaration that broke his lifelong pact as a mere observer. He was no longer a witness to the laws of nature. He was about to cast a vote. He unshouldered his worn canvas pack, his movements slow and methodical. His calloused fingers, accustomed to the intricacies of traps and tracking, fumbled for a moment with the buckle before pulling out a small parcel wrapped in waxed cloth. It was his emergency ration, a handful of dark, salt-cured beef jerky, tough as leather and rich with the smoky scent of hickory. It was his own lifeline, the food he depended on when a hunt failed or a storm trapped him miles from home. This was not a casual offering. It was a sacrifice. As he unwrapped the parcel, the potent, savory aroma drifted on the still air. It was a scent of life, of sustenance. He saw a flicker of response from the eagle. Her head lifted slightly, her sharp eye fixing on the source of the smell. Even Max, lost in his haze of pain, seemed to stir, his nostrils twitching faintly. Elias took a piece of the jerky in his hand. He looked at the magnificent bird, at the dislocated wing that held her prisoner on the ground. He knew that pain was a thief of strength. He also knew that energy was the currency of survival. If the eagle had any chance of forcing her wing back into its socket, of attempting the desperate flight back to her young, she needed fuel for the fire of her own will. "Easy now," Elias murmured, his voice a low rumble, less a command and more a prayer. He tossed the first piece of jerky onto a flat stone that lay between them, a safe distance away. It landed with a soft thud. The eagle watched, her head cocked, her entire being a tense coil of suspicion and desperate need. Fear of man was an instinct carved into her very soul, a terror passed down through generations. But the hunger, and the maddening scent of the meat, was a more immediate and powerful master. Elias tossed another piece, this one landing closer. He was not just offering food, he was offering a chance. He was making a calculated investment, a wager against the brutal certainty of death. He was betting on the strength of a mother's love. He watched as the eagle, after a long, tense moment, finally succumbed. She took a painful, dragging step forward, her useless wing scraping against the gravel. Then another. Her movements were awkward, pathetic for a creature born to rule the sky, but they were driven by a purpose that transcended her pain. She was moving toward his offering, toward the hope of life, not just for herself, but for the hungry mouths waiting in the silence of her nest. Elias held his breath, his part in the drama now over. He had made his choice. The golden eagle devoured the pieces of jerky with a desperate, primal hunger. The salt and protein hit her system like a jolt of lightning, a wave of pure energy that pushed back against the encroaching fog of pain and exhaustion. As she ate, Elias watched, his decision now sealed. He gave one last, long look at the still form of the German shepherd, a silent promise passing between man and dog. Then, without a sound, he turned and began the urgent journey back toward the ranger station, his tired legs moving with a speed he hadn't possessed in years. Left alone in the mountain's silence, the eagle finished the last scrap of meat. The fuel ignited the fire of her will. She dragged her body towards a jagged outcrop of rock, her mind singularly focused. Bracing her feet, she pushed her injured wing against the unyielding stone with a surge of immense, instinctual power. A sickening pop echoed in the quiet air, a sound of bone and ligament resetting, followed by a wave of white-hot agony. But through the pain, she could feel it. The joint was back in its socket. The wing was still a source of excruciating pain, but it was no longer a useless appendage. It was hers again. Hours later, Elias stumbled into the ranger station, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He quickly explained the situation to the young ranger on duty, a capable man named Dave with a calm demeanor. Recognizing the urgency, Dave immediately got on the radio, calling the town's veterinarian, Dr. Evans, a practical, no-nonsense woman who agreed to meet them with her medical kit. Within the hour, a small rescue party was assembled. Elias, refusing to rest, insisted on leading them back. As they made their way up the mountain, the eagle began her own journey. Her first attempt at flight was a failure, a painful, clumsy hop that ended in the dust. But she tried again. Pushing off with her powerful legs, she beat her wings against the air in a labored, agonizing rhythm. It was not soaring. It was a brutal, ugly fight for every inch of altitude. She flew low over the treetops, a painful, slow-motion struggle, resting on branches when the pain became too much, her gaze fixed on the distant cliffs that held her young. The rescue team found Max just as the sun began to dip below the peaks. He was weaker, his life hanging by a fragile thread, but he was alive. Dr. Evans went to work with quiet efficiency, cleaning his wounds, administering fluids and painkillers, and splinting his broken leg. It was then that Dave noticed the small, tarnished tag on his collar. He wiped it clean and read the inscription, a name, Max, and a phone number. The call connected to a world away from the silent mountains. A woman named Sarah Peterson answered, her voice trembling with a hope she hadn't dared to feel for weeks. In the background, a child's voice could be heard asking, "Mom, is it him? Is it Max?" They had been searching every day, their hope dwindling with each passing sunset. Now, a miracle had found them. The final reunion took place at Dr. Evans' small, clean clinic. Max lay on a soft blanket, connected to an IV drip, his tail giving a weak but persistent thump against the floor. When the Peterson family burst through the door, it was their 8-year-old son, Leo, who saw him first. "Max!" he cried, his voice breaking. The dog's ears shot up. He lifted his head, and a soft whine escaped his throat as Leo rushed to his side, burying his tear-streaked face in the dog's neck. Sarah and her husband Mark knelt beside them, their hands stroking the loyal friend they thought they had lost forever. It was a perfect, fragile moment of love and relief, a family made whole again. From the doorway, Elias watched, his heart full. He had started to turn away, his part in the story finished, when Mr. Peterson saw him. "You," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The ranger said you were the one who found him." Elias simply nodded, but the family surrounded him, their gratitude, a torrent of heartfelt words and tearful thanks that he could not deflect. At that same moment, miles away, the golden eagle finally reached her nest. She collapsed onto the ledge, her strength completely gone. 2 eaglets, thin and weak, swarmed her, peeping frantically. With the last of her energy, she regurgitated the precious, life-giving food she had carried all this way. A week later, Elias stood on a high ridge, his binoculars trained on the distant cliff face. He saw not a struggling bird, but a queen, soaring in magnificent circles on the wind. She dove, and then rose again, a rabbit clutched in her talons, and flew gracefully to the nest where two healthy, strong eaglets waited. Down in the valley, a German shepherd with a bandaged leg chased a red ball thrown by a laughing young boy. Elias lowered his binoculars, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. He had not broken nature's law. He had simply given it a chance to find its own, more compassionate balance. In the great wilderness of life, we are often told that survival is a battle. But the story of Elias, Max, and the eagle reminds us that true strength is found not in the will to conquer, but in the quiet courage to care. It shows us how a single act of compassion can create ripples that heal more than one world, honoring the powerful unseen bonds that connect us all. If stories like this, filled with hope and unexpected kindness, resonate with your own heart, we invite you to follow our journey to ensure these echoes of empathy and connection continue to be heard.